Good evening, everyone. Tonight I'd like to talk about innate goodness and also about just to mention also the absolute manifest. So one way we can understand innate goodness is as a metta practice, where we direct metta to ourselves. And metta is, of course, one of the four divine abodes, the boundless four divine abodes, where we abide in boundless benevolence, boundless goodwill, boundless warm friendliness. And the four divine abodes are, of course, four serenity type practices. And the other abodes are, of course, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. And there are many ways of practicing the divine abodes and many ways of practicing metta. And I particularly like the way it's taught in early Buddhism, and the way it's taught in those early stages was as boundless states of mind. And when I say boundless, I mean infinitely spacious, as well as boundless in the sense of no boundaries between self and other. So the way these four divine abodes were taught in early Buddhism is as non-dual states, basically, in a non-dual way. So there are experiences of non-duality. So non-duality, of course, means a lack of subject-object bifurcation. In other words, the ideas of me and you, me in here and yous out there, disappear and dissolve. And when we're practicing the boundless states, sometimes in a dualistic way of thinking about the boundless abodes is as three directions. Like generally it's like compassion, for example. It's compassion from self to other, compassion from other to self, and compassion from self to self. There's three directions. But when they're considered as boundless, and here we're talking about boundless benevolence, the three directions become redundant because it's a non-dual experience, and there's just the unitary experience of benevolence. So, but again, we live in a dualistic world. We live in a way of me and you, and I go to work and you guys do everything, and here we are together. We're talking about me and you, and there's maybe it's my non-dual experience, but coming from your perspective, it's your non-dual experience as well. So I heard a really good saying the other day: just because you're experiencing non-duality doesn't mean you don't hurt someone's foot when you step on it. There's the reality of non-duality, meaning it's just my mind, as well as the reality of an external reality, like the fact that you guys are there. And I think kind of understanding that mystery, the mystery of how that works, is kind of unanswerable, but it is resolved when we practice the boundless divine abodes. So I've been practicing metta for a long time, for as long as I've been associated with Buddhism. I think it was one of the first meditations I learned, metta. And in my experience, we can imagine, remember, or remind ourselves with images, words, or other associations what it's like to be loved, what it's like to love, and what it's like to love ourselves. And these reminders of this dualistic approach to experience awakens these qualities within us. So for years, when I first started practicing, I was only a teenager really, and I couldn't practice metta very well. It didn't really sort of click easily, but I could practice compassion because I knew what suffering was like. I could suffer, and I really got into a lot of suffering. I've had a lot of suffering, and if I just looked at someone, I could say, oh yes, they experienced that suffering as well, and I can feel their suffering. So compassion was really quite easy. I remember warm benevolence become sort of natural when I recognized a deep friendship with someone, like having a deep friendship. And I realized, this is what warm benevolence is about. Then I could start to practice warm benevolence. And when I had children, it was easy. All I had to do was think of my beautiful children. And then when I had grandchildren, super easy, because they seem so innocent now, at a grandfather's age, looking at my grandchildren, they're so beautifully innocent. There's something innately beautiful about them, something innately good about them. So these reminders are ways for us to awaken this quality of metta. And these qualities are unconditional. That is, they don't depend on conditions to be there. In the Metta Sutta, and I could read it later, but it probably takes about 5 or 10 minutes to read it. So in the Metta Sutta, there's a description that metta is like a love a mother has for her child, her only child. And one can understand that this love is unconditional. It doesn't matter whether the child spews or poos or cries or whatever. This is a baby. The mother's love is innate. It doesn't have to be conditioned to be there. It's just there. So it doesn't, metta or innate goodness now I'm talking about, it does not depend on us doing anything to deserve it. We don't have to be approved of or be a particular way to recognize our own innate goodness, our own metta, this quality that's within us. And it counteracts the feelings that we're not good enough, that we're not lovable, or we're rejected from the tribe. The thing about, there's so much suffering from feeling rejected from the tribe. That's a lot about what shame is about, actually. Shame is a social emotion. I won't go into great details about it, but it is this feeling of, it's a fear of being rejected from the tribe, essentially. And warm benevolence, or innate goodness, recognizing one's own innate goodness, is the antidote to hatred, both when it's directed towards ourselves or others. So, the term innate, I was looking it up in the dictionary because I was introduced to innate goodness only last year when I began practicing with Stephen Snyder, and he said, recognize your innate goodness. And wow, and I thought, what is my innate goodness? I could find something, but for me at first it became like that Zen koan, what is your original face? You know that Zen koan? I don't know much about koans other than they're riddles that have no real answer, but one finds something that's non-conceptual in a way to relate to that riddle. So for me at first it was like, what is my original unconditionality? What is it? It was so interesting to go back and look into my heart, and it actually became quite simple. in the instructions that Stephen gave, it's really quite simple. It's just this recognizing a feeling in your heart. It's like you can awaken it by thinking, for me it's thinking of my grandchildren, and I recognize their innate goodness. Then I notice my heart's response and I just stay there. And it's this lovely buoyancy and happiness and lightness. It's quite beautiful. So, Migyur Rinpoche, in a course that I was on with him a few months ago, it was an online course, he said that loving kindness or metta was innate. And it's innate that all beings want to be happy. And one way we can describe metta is the wish for happiness for self or others. He said that this happiness unites all beings. And it's because it's something innate, it's always there. And when one thinks of the meaning of innate goodness, it could refer to perceiving the goodness in things, just as metta does. Sometimes the way we describe metta is the wish for happiness. Metta is the wish for happiness or happiness and well-being. And it is also, I've discovered, and other people describe it like this as well, seeing the goodness in things. If we're caught up with ill will and aversion and anger and frustration and all these aversive qualities, what we tend to do is see what's wrong with everything. But the opposite of that, the antidote to that experience, is metta, or warm benevolence. And when we think about it as innate goodness, what we're actually beginning to see is the goodness in things, like the beauty in things, the behind all the defilements or the kilesa with an individual, seeing into their nature, their beautiful nature. I guess you could go so far as to say their true nature, or their Buddha nature even. So another way of considering innate goodness is that it's a consideration of the absolute manifest. And in February I gave a talk here and also on one of my days of meditation online. And I mentioned 3 developments in Buddhism over the 2 millennia 2.5 millennia that Buddhism has been around. There's been 3 developments, and I mentioned the first development was called the path of abandonment, where we let go of craving. That's the aim. We abandon craving, and that's you can see that practice in Theravadan Buddhism. The second path is the path of transformation. By the way, in February when I gave this talk, I mentioned that I heard these developments in a retreat that I did with Venerable Gyalgo, who's a Chan meditation master. It was a meditation retreat online with Venerable Analia at the same time, and it was a retreat on emptiness. And it was wonderful to listen to Venerable Gyalgo give a scholarly presentation on a silent illumination, which is in the same as in my opinion, as shikantaza, that particular meditation, where you're not, when it was also the same as signless samadhi, where you're not picking up an object and you're just resting present, here now. So the first development he called the path of abandonment. The second one he called the path of transformation, which is about transforming negative energies into positive energies, and you could see this in Vajrayana Buddhism. And the third was the path of recognition, where we see practices such as shikantaza, where we recognize our true nature, our Buddha nature, and the path of recognition you could find in practices such as shikantaza or clear illumination, or even perhaps silent samadhi. I'm not sure. It doesn't talk about that in silent samadhi, in the silent samadhi instructions, but there is this sense of recognizing something that was already there. And in early Buddhism, it's about cultivation. We hear the term for meditation is bhavana. So bhavana means bringing into being. So the whole idea of meditation, in many respects in early Buddhism, in this first path of abandonment, is about cultivating something that's not there. Cultivating wholesome qualities, cultivating wisdom so you can see what's there. And the term for meditation in Mahayana Buddhism, Tibetan Mahayana Buddhism, is gom, I think. The word's gom, which means familiarization. And if you think about that, what that means is becoming familiar with what's there. And the whole emphasis in these later developments of Buddhism and the path of recognition is to actually see what's already there, to recognize and become familiar with what is already there, our Buddha nature, or the Absolute. Now, in the last 6 months I've been studying with a Zen and Theravadan teacher called Stephen Snyder, and he's written a few books. They're very wonderful books. And one book he's written called Demystifying Awakenings, really great, it's fantastic. And he says that awakening experience needs 3 components. The first component, he says, is a deep experience of the absence of self, or not self, or emptiness. That's the first component. The second component, and this is kind of interesting, the second component is the recognition of one's true nature as one's true identity. In other words, recognizing Buddha nature and identifying with that rather than identifying with these impermanent conditions that we call ourself. And the third condition, the third component, is a thorough unity experience where all is one, or everything is in a fabric of interconnected, and that's my words, oneness. I would see oneness here as meaning the same as interconnectedness or interbeing or interdependence. There's this oneness about things. I mean, people use different words, and that's what he was saying. And he said that in traditional Zen practices, the first 2 components are emphasized, but the third sense of interconnectivity, interconnected unity is often ignored. And I've heard him say this, that he said that some traditional Zen teachers can be brutal. So, in many respects, and this is the same as what Analayo talks about, when Analayo talks about how compassion without emptiness, or without the inside of emptiness, is exhausting. Of course, you'll be practicing one of the near enemies of compassion, which is like, pity, or patronizing pity, or wanting to rescue people, or some sort of aversion for discomfort and suffering, so you want to get rid of it. And so compassion without emptiness is exhausting, while emptiness without compassion is toxic. In other words, if you get into this non-dual state and you experience emptiness, or what you think is emptiness, and you bypass the sense that the understanding that there are actually beings out there, this mystery of a non-dual experience, but in fact, you've got a non-dual experience as well. I mean, as far as you're concerned, that's your center of the universe, and there's my center of the universe. The reality that there's another. There is another. So if we bypass that reality that there is another, and we just consider what we're seeing is empty, we're not really getting it. we're missing that point of the compassion. We're missing the sense of interconnected unity. So, being able to connect with ourselves and common humanity balances our view and provides a way to integrate the reality of non-duality with the reality of there being other beings out there in the external universe. There's a mystery, but it resolves that mystery. We can access the absolute. Now, the absolute is when we wake up, we experience the absolute. Okay, and Stephen Snyder has described it as having two functions. There's the unmanifest, which includes Nibbana, and the vast emptiness of nothing, and the manifest, which is everything that arises from that. And everything that arises from that, the unmanifest, the manifest, the absolute manifest, could include metta, or this divine abode of metta as a boundless divine abode, as a way enlightened beings experience metta, as a non-dual state, but connecting with the other. So, accessing our innate goodness, it can be a portal to the unmanifest. We can access the absolute, both unmanifest and manifest, by being present and awake to what is here now. And the only time there is now. And this moves beyond our conceptual projections onto the world and reality, and sees through these creations to experience the absolute, both manifest and unmanifest. So we can use concepts to help, but eventually it is by letting go of the concepts and being open to the unconditioned. And we can be present for the manifest, and sometimes this can be a portal to the unmanifest, when we can open to the benevolence and the compassion that's present here now, pervading everything, out there in the universe, everywhere, internal and external, pervasive within and without. It allows us to surrender the hindrances and identities with that which is impermanent and not self, and let go of our suffering. So thank you very much for listening, and may we all wake up to the experience of boundless, unconditional benevolence and our innate goodness. Thank you.